One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt. One APIA Nevada. One APIA.
Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. So excited to have you. Happy New Year to all of you. It's great to be celebrating this new year tonight with a new look for our show. Matilda and Shelby and Maria on our team put a lot of time and energy into redesigning the show, making it a little more fresh and up to date. And so you're going to see a new look on many of our ads and many of our opening cards tonight. So I hope you enjoy them. And I hope you enjoy all of the new stuff we have coming for Out in Front for the next couple of months. We're very excited about it. So big shout out to the team for putting together a whole new look for Out in Front for the new year. I also want to update everyone that we are currently on the 11th vote for Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Kevin McCarthy still doesn't have the votes to get the job done. So we're over here cackling a little bit about that. So happy New Year to you about that as well, because once again, the Republicans cannot govern. So we have an important show for you tonight. We are talking about rebelling the system. We want to know what's going on with the death penalty here in Nevada. Over the holidays, there were some updates as outgoing Governor Steve Sisolak tried to commute the sentences of some of the folks on death row. Unfortunately, that wasn't able to get done. And so we're going to talk to a few experts here in Nevada about why that happened and where the death penalty stands now. So I want to welcome 3 amazing guests this evening who are going to be talking to us. If you have questions, go ahead and put those questions in the chat. If you want to know something about the death penalty nationwide or here in Nevada, now is your time to ask these experts your questions. So put them in the chat. Also a reminder, we have our Progressive Summit coming up. So if you want to get involved with issues like these, now is the time to sign up for the Progressive Summit on January 21st and 22nd. We're going to have all kinds of panels. Our agenda was just announced this morning. So you're going to want to make sure you get your ticket now for that or get a scholarship for that now, because we want all of you to attend. So make sure you get that done. We'll put the link in the chat on all of the different platforms. And again, share this with your friends and family. We need folks to know what's happening with the death penalty here in Nevada. So share this episode tonight with your friends and family on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you're watching, and make sure that we're getting this information out to as many people as possible. So tonight on our show, I want to welcome Brandon Cunningham. He's the manager of community engagement for the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty. We also have Jody Hawking, one of my sheroes. She is the founder and executive director of Return Strong. And we have Denise Bolaños. She is the digital organizer of Return Strong as well. So welcome to the show, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Brandon, I'm going to bring you in first. Can you briefly explain what Governor Sisolak was trying to do when the meeting happened on December 20th, and what we were trying to have the Board of Pardons do with the folks who are currently on death row in Nevada?
Right. Okay. Super easy question. So in Nevada, unlike a bunch of other states in the country, pardons and commutations are dealt with by a board made up of the governor and Supreme Court justices. In other states, the governor alone has that power, but in our state, it's a board of these folk. all elected officials. What he was trying to do was basically commute all of their sentences to life without possibility of parole. If I recall correctly, that's the only sentence in Nevada that can't be changed. So he was looking to commute everyone who was on death row to life without, because of the long lead time on death row cases, upwards of 20 to 30 years. He basically would have wiped out everyone who was on our death row. And then we just wouldn't really have the death penalty for at least a generation, assuming no other actions taken on the death penalty.
And just for our viewers who may not understand what commuting the death penalty sentence means, or what the word commuting means, give our viewers a sense of what that would mean in terms of these people who currently reside on death row, and what that would mean for them going forward if this was able to have been done.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of people misunderstood. This was not this wasn't removing their guilt of the crime. It was really just resentencing. In Nevada, currently, we haven't performed an execution since 2007. So for us, effectively, our death row is life without parole. So what the commutation would have done is remove them off of death row and put them into the general population. So it reduces a lot of the strain that's put on Ely State Prison, which has had massive issues staffing because it's in a gold town. So the cost of living there is astronomical. It would also change some of the what's happening with their cases legally. There's a lot of legal work that goes into all death cases to make sure that you are killing the right person, that they don't have mental health issues, and they're culpable for the crime they committed. So it would have removed a lot of those barriers for cases that are still working their way through. And yeah, it would have worked to save the state lots of money on one hand, and I think it would have prevented some of the issues we've had in the past trying to perform executions. We're seeing that in some other states where they're botching executions they're attempting. In Nevada, didn't even get that far. We couldn't even get a hold of drugs to perform executions. So right.
So Brandon, tell us a little bit about the coalition that you work with, that Mark works with. We have been a part of the coalition, a proud member of the coalition at Battleborn Progress now for years. Tell us what you all work on and why this is such an important issue to the state of Nevada.
Yeah, so we're kind of a one-trick pony. We mostly focus on abolishing the death penalty, but we've also worked with organizations like Return Strong on some of the abysmal conditions that have been happening in Nevada prisons. It wasn't great before COVID, but COVID definitely accelerated staffing issues with medical care and medical neglect, issues with maintenance in facilities. So we've worked on that issue, and we've worked directly on abolition of the death penalty. And the importance for me ultimately is our state alone has had about 5 people who have left death row, either because they haven't qualified to receive the death penalty anymore. In the case of James Allen, he was a minor when he was put on death row, and due to some law changes in the 2010s, he got removed from death row, and there's 4 other people who were removed because of issues around their innocence. And there's about 24 more that have been removed due to weird legal issues. So they didn't they committed the crime, but they didn't qualify for the death penalty anymore due to some legal shenanigans. So for us, we're looking at a system where we routinely get it wrong, and there are people who end up on death row with issues to their innocence, mental health issues. And for us, it really typifies all of the issues we have in our criminal justice system around racial bias, around mental health. And I know specifically for our coalition, almost all of our staff are murder victim family members, and most of our board are as well. And for us, it's an issue we're passionate about because it doesn't, for me, it doesn't work to help victims heal. What it instead does is let the criminal justice system take up millions of dollars that could go towards victim services or literally anything else, into a system that doesn't work particularly well.
Thank you for that, Brandon. Brandon, we're going to come back to you in just a second. I want to bring in Jody from Return Strong. Jody, you were at the hearing with me on the 20th when Governor Sisolak attempted to commute the sentences for the folks who are on death row. We heard from many people, including a gentleman who was on at one point death row and had his sentence commuted. Talk to us a little bit about how the prison system in Nevada needs more transparency, communication, and accountability from the Nevada Department of Corrections, and how that plays into this conversation about the death penalty.
So I think it's a complicated question. I think one of the things, and it was really like how Return Strong first started to really stand up for people who were incarcerated, was because their voices were silenced. And what we realized, as especially during COVID, which is kind of when we came onto the scene in Nevada, was that there's a quote by Howard Zinn about, about the people's version of history and the government's version of history. And I feel like over the past few years, as we've become like involved in this work, we've realized that, 99% of the time when NDOC is showing up, they're giving a version that does not equate to what we are hearing from incarcerated people and families. And we have a very expansive, in the past year, we've had, we're still counting. I think it's about 3,500 letters that have come in. So this isn't like one or two people are telling us these things. And so there was always this discrepancy between what NDOC was saying and what people with lived experience were saying. And so that was really the key to the push, is that either we needed transparency and communication, or we need accountability, and or both, right? And so that has been the push from the beginning of what we've been calling for. And we haven't really received much of either. And I think this, the pardons board and the potential to commute those sentences fall right back into that same situation of, it's like too little too late. And even the situation, Marcy's Law, even though I am obviously not a judge, I would still say that these arguments about Marcy's Law really just don't make sense. And so it says full and timely. So everything is full and timely. So there's nothing in timely that says that there needed to be a certain number of days or whatever, that ended up being. And I think that till we get to a point there's really a trend across the United States now for oversight and accountability with all of corrections. We have been asking and trying to find a sponsor for a bill that would be an oversight bill for this session. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we're going to get it this session. We're not going to stop fighting for accountability, but we need both. We need that transparency and communication. Our loved ones are inside of the prisons. And so and then, sorry, I'm a little off today.
You're good. No, I want to ask you, there was some very emotional testimony during the pardons board that I found very compelling. To just an average person who had never really attended a pardons board meeting before. The first case that was heard, the family members actually came up and asked for a pardon for the person. And he wasn't on death row, but they asked for him to have his sentence or have him pardoned. Talk to us about why the work that you do is so important in terms of returning back some of these folks to the community and bringing justice for some of these folks, because that was a really powerful moment. And everyone in the audience was crying, and you had the family members of the person he had killed come up there and support him. And it was incredibly beautiful. So just talk to us about that moment and the work y'all do around some of these cases.
So Return Strong started about we call it a pardons advocacy project, and it really is to like spotlight some of the problems with the pardons process. And one of the things that we had identified was that, the pardons process, like that is meant to be an act of grace. Yet when you would see, I always just randomly, I'll pick Denise because I always pick on her, but, Denise and I both commit a murder and Denise goes to get a pardon, and there is a large family that, or even any family that shows up to give a victim statement against her pardon, she's probably not going to get one. If I commit a murder and the person is a person who is homeless and living on the streets and has no family, and then I go for a pardon, I'm probably going to get mine. And we just feel like that's one of the things, the issues that we're working on is like, that's not really justice, right? That's completely random. And so we are hoping to build some recognition of restorative justice practices in the pardons board process, which don't exist right now. But Brian Brown, that was the person who got the pardon, and Alicia Evangelista was the girlfriend of the victim at the time. What was like so impactful about that is that they were able to like really recognize that, and I think I said it at the pardons board also, is that if you have a loved one that is murdered or something happens, like there isn't an amount of time that is going to magically heal that. The other person can do, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, a death sentence, and it's not necessarily going to heal that hurt for the family. And Alicia and I have talked a few times afterwards, and she was like, that was the first time that she had heard anybody put it that way, and was so glad that the opportunity had existed for them to be able to like work through that, because the system doesn't allow it, right? Restorative justice isn't something that is in practice in Nevada. Yet it's a best practice for juveniles. It's a best practice for people who have gone through this process. And just as a kind of cool side note is that we have teams of people that are in the middle of like getting trained to go out and do restorative justice work and participatory defense and some other things. And Brian and Alicia, when Brian comes home and Alicia have both agreed that they would like to be part of the same team to go out and like educate community and talk to other victims' families and model this for the pardons board. And so we're hoping that will really bring change to that process, because I asked Alicia afterwards like how that felt when she went and hugged him, and she goes, it was like a 26-year burden just was gone. She goes, he could have been in prison another 50 years and I wouldn't have felt any differently, but in that moment being able to just hug him and say it's okay and you deserve to be free too, she said, took all the weight off of me.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that, because it was so impactful. And we talk about how storytelling matters so much in all of the work we do, regardless of the issue that we work on. But in that moment, the storytelling and them having that moment to share, to hug, and to cry with each other, it was unbelievable. And it was absolutely beautiful. Jody, I want to talk to you a little bit about the pardons board, because I don't know how many people actually know. You say, it's an act of grace, but the functionality of the pardons board and what it does, not just for people on death row, but any kind of sentences. I don't think a lot of people maybe even knew it existed before that moment, at least in the progressive space, who don't do this work every day. So talk to us about what makes a person eligible to go before the pardons board, and just how operationally the pardons board works in Nevada, and why it's important, not just to death penalty cases, but to all cases.
So I wanted to be clear, like, I'm not an attorney, and there are a lot of legalities about who qualifies and who doesn't qualify. And I can't really speak to those pieces, but so in our project, we really have looked for people who have served excessive sentences that maybe were not just in the first place. We have a group of 23 people that we're trying to get seats on the agenda. So like kind of the process of what happens is people apply and then sorry, my dog is trying to climb on me right now. And then people have to get a seat on the agenda, which is one of the problems is, and I've been pretty vocal about it, is that the best chance of getting a seat on the agenda is to pay one of a couple of attorneys that generally are charging about $50,000 for their services. That will get you a seat on the agenda. What we're saying is that's not justice, right? So that's leaving people completely out of that cycle of if you can't come up with the money for an attorney to get that agenda seat. That is the key, because then you at least get in front of the pardons board. And as Brandon said, the pardons board, like in Nevada, it is a whole panel of Supreme Court justices, the AG, the governor. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. Brandon, is that everybody?
I think so, yes.
That was everybody I saw that day.
Okay. I wanted to add the Secretary of State, but that's the Board of Pardon or the Board of Prison Commissioners. So I think that's where I was going. And then you get the opportunity to present your case and present your community support and talk about like what happened in the commission of your crime and what is different now. I recently had a meeting with the families of our cohort for this year, which there's 23 of them. And we added up the amount of years that these 23 people have served. Most of them were juveniles when they were convicted under the age of 18. And it was close to 500 years. It was like 477 years of time. Some of them. And so now the pardons board asked them to come and bring community support. So I had one family that is like, he's been in, it wasn't even a family member. It was somebody who knew him who had previously been in prison. He's been in 46 years. What community support does he realistically? And so we've just identified a lot of problems that end up making the pardons board kind of a justice for sale type event again. And it like the same injustices that you see during convictions and sentencing with disparities for people of color, juvenile justice, women, all of these things are reincarnated during the pardons process. And so a little over a year ago, we committed to really two parts. One is on every 2 years, like we're drilling home, like here's the first set of issues, right? And what our hope is to create cultural change around those so that they become common knowledge in the progressive community, that we find ways to be able to move those issues forward. Do I have time to give one more example? I don't want to talk too long.
You're
so like
fine.
another example of something that we found, the victim statements and people not getting their pardon because of victim statements we found was like, we're very sensitive to victims and victims' families and what they've been through, but that's not a just way to make that decision. Another area that we saw, like I said, disparities in people who were coming to the board, like racial disparities in that. The other thing was when we started to look at cases with women, one of the things that the application says for the pardons board is it asks the question of, did you commit your crime? Like when you committed your crime, were you there's like mitigating factors and aggravating factors. Were you in an emotional state because you were afraid of your victim? But the actual thing for women is that often they were in situations where their co-defendant is who they were afraid of, but that does not become a mitigating factor, only if you were afraid of the victim. And so, we have several women who have applied and who we're going to spotlight this year and try to get seats on a board who it wasn't their victim they were afraid of. It was they had been in, there's a woman, Jennifer Palmer, that is one of our cohorts, and she said, she wrote us a letter, and she said she had begun to be molested and beaten at about the age of 6 or 7. And she learned at a very young age that you don't tell a man no. And so she then was in a situation, her crime, she was forced by her co-defendant to like entice somebody to come to a motel room where he was then going to rob them. And she was like, I knew in that moment that I either was going to do it or I was going to be dead. And I did it. And then there ended up being a murder in the course of it. And now the person who committed the murder is no longer in prison, but she is still in prison over 30 years. And there's no way to count that as a mitigating factor. And so we just find like stories, and when we listen, it's not one story that's like that. It will be hundreds of stories like that. And so our goal is every year to elevate a group of candidates or cohorts who would, their stories tell the story of a group of people, and hope to be able to like educate our communities that like prison isn't what you think that it is, and people are not in prison for the things that you think that they are.
Wow, that is an incredibly horrible story. Thank you for sharing it. And I think it's right. You know, Aaron in the chat said that seems like such an important gap to address. Being coerced to commit a crime is an act of violence, right? And so you'd think that that'd be something that they'd want to address in this, but obviously that's still a gap.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to bring in Denise. Denise, thank you so much for joining us. As an organizer, what does it mean to be able to help incarcerated folks be reunited with their families?
Well, for me, reuniting with families can look many different ways. It's not necessarily somebody being released from incarceration and back in their communities or with their families or being home. It can also look like, a mom that hasn't seen her son in years because of a denial of a visitation application, and, being able to, as an organization, help get that denial appeal, that turned over. That's also a reunification for that mom to be able to hug her son finally, or being able to assist with the translating process of filling these things out for folk that are part of the Latino community and are not English speakers. NDOC is not language access friendly. And so that is a hurdle to being able to maintaining those ties to the people that you love while they're incarcerated. So that, reuniting can look a lot of ways, but in those ways, I think it's really gratifying to be able to play a part in that.
Thank you for that. And how did you become so passionate about the work that you do every day, and specifically working with this group of people who need advocates and justice?
So in every job that I've held, it's always been focused on helping the community in some way. But it wasn't until I experienced firsthand what it's like to have someone incarcerated that I began to have to navigate this system. And it wasn't until I had to, that I kind of realized how difficult that this whole system is. I've known my husband since we were teenagers, and he was wrongfully convicted in the state of Nevada over a decade ago. And we've been together for 5 of those years, and the complexity of the system that is NDOC was then and is still just baffling to me. Everything is a hurdle, or, from something as small as getting prescription glasses for my husband to fighting, to something as big as fighting his wrongful conviction. But there are no avenues for people to take. There is no guidance for families. And so that's when I had to get outside help, look to see what I could find, because I knew there had to be something out there, which is how I found Jody at the beginning of Return Strong. And once I got involved, so many other things started to pop up. because it wasn't just my husband and his needs. It was, tens of thousands of people that are incarcerated in this state that have the same kind of hurdles to get across.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. So, what role does Return Strong play in connecting incarcerated people with support from the broader community, or as people are transitioning back into the community, making sure that that transition, they're being set up for success as they're transitioning?
Well, all people who are in prison, they are incarcerated persons, regardless of how they got there. Their lived experiences, while different in many ways, they also intersect within NDOC. And I feel like Return Strong has really amplified those intersectionalities and the experiences of really just being able to give a voice to the person behind the back number. It's we all have so much more in common than we think that we do. So being able to kind of like hold people's hands basically, or like walk beside them while they navigate this system, I think is huge. And I think it's really important for people that are being released from prison to know that there are organizations out there, people out there that want to see them do well, and just creating that awareness, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, Jody, I want to bring you back in. We recently saw the hunger strike that was going on in Ely at the prison there. What was the result of that? And what are the needs, are the needs of the inmates now being met? And where are we at with all of that? Because that was a really important moment.
Yeah, so that, I think what was like really interesting with that is that was actually the second attempt at a hunger strike. The first one was negotiated out so quickly, but NDOC never followed up or like kept any of their commitments to the people when that was negotiated. So then, several months later, actually it was like about a year later, a little over a year later, we're back at the same point. The hunger strike ended, from my understanding. I was working with 3 different strike leaders on each unit to try to help like navigate what their demands were, what they were looking for. The only thing that was resolved was there had been one of their demands was around, it's like sanction stacking. So it was like you would get a minor write-up and you'd lose your phone for 30 days. And then you get another minor write-up for, you have butter from the chow hall, and now you get another 30-day restriction on something. And what they were doing is, it was like they would run them consecutively, so it would just turn into like years of being on restrictions, and they weren't supposed to do it that way. So we were able to actually get the AR clarified, and they were supposedly have changed that statewide, not just at Ely, which I think was a huge win because it was happening everywhere. The problem with the timing of the hunger strike was that we could not gain they didn't have leverage. There was an acting director in place, and he stated that he had no ability to make any negotiations with hunger strikers, and that they were just going to put NG tubes in if they lost too much weight. But they were also manipulating their weight, which is another story. The Governor Sisolak, we had approached them and asked for a meeting and received a response back saying that they could not do anything, that we would need to talk to at the time Governor-elect Lombardo's transition team. And the transition team answer was, we can't even discuss this until we're in office, until after he's sworn in. And so it was kind of like everybody pointed at everybody else. So the 2 things that did happen is the sanction stacking, and there was a meeting with Airmark, which is the food vendor that NDOC contracted with. And that was on a bid. So Aramark bid the lowest. That's who they chose. But from my understanding, according to talking to NEOC, that they are already like 15 or 20% over the budget of what they had predicted. So the AG's office is meeting with the attorneys from Aramark, and there is a potential that that contract could get canceled. But in the meantime, people are still not getting food. Like they're not, we were told they were getting double food. That's not happening. We were told that they stopped feeding them bologna and rice. That's not happening. I just got letters from Southern Desert. It's not just Ely. Everything that was an issue with people at Ely is an issue across the state. I can pull letters from every single facility across the state, and they're the same issues. It's just that that particular group of people were willing to take the risk of, whatever. We are hoping that new administration will work with us to start finding solutions to these problems. Because they've been ongoing for several years now, and they just keep getting worse. And so we have a little Zorenda being announced today as the new acting director is giving us a minuscule of hope, because I think historically he has really had kind of a humanitarian type approach to incarceration.
I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I have a habit of answering questions.
No,
before.
it's good. I'm glad we're on the same page here, because I saw
Yeah.
that announcement today.
Yep. We were very excited about it. I mean, it's not perfect. It's still, as an organization that really we're prison abolitionists, I would love to see a world without prison. So any director of prisons isn't really my, the goal for me, but I think that out of the choices that there were, it is not, I think it's a step possibly in a new direction. And I know we were saying and like writing to everybody and their brother when Daniels resigned that we needed to pause and make sure that whoever we brought into leadership was somebody that was gonna make sure that we're looking at what do we want corrections to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And so I think it was there could have been more progressive choices, but for like who was making that choice, I feel like it was a step in the direction. It was much better than I thought it was going to be. So
well, that's music to my ears, because I was worried about it when I saw it, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to ask Jody about this tonight. Denise, I want to bring you back in, and then we'll go back to Brandon to kind of put a bow on all of this. Can you talk to us about how beneficial it is for formerly incarcerated folks to share their stories if they're comfortable, whether or if they're still incarcerated, how it helps for them to share their stories as well?
Well, I mean, without the insight of people who have lived these experiences, we wouldn't know the injustices that happen. And by telling their stories, they really have helped and will continue to help drive change in this state so that things can be better. We can't change their past. We can't change what they've been through while they've been both inside and outside of prison, but we can help you guys, people that are impacted by incarceration in any way. We can help amplify those stories and be there to try to drive this change and hopefully be able to create that change and healing that so many people need.
Thank you, Denise. Jody, I'll come back to you in a second, but because I want to talk to you about legislative session that's coming. But Brenda, I want to come back to you. So where are we at now with the death penalty in Nevada? Obviously, last session, we were not able to get the death penalty bill through the state Senate. They weren't able to have a hearing on it. That was very, very, very disappointing to all of us who are part of the coalition. We saw that the sentences were not able to be commuted. So where are we at with the death penalty, and where do we go from here?
All right, all good questions. I know for us, we have, we are working to speak with our new governor's team. Considering some of the past statements he's made, we're not, we remain hopeful, but past statements, indicate he might not be a champion on the issue. But for us right now, we are looking at getting a lot into research around the death penalty. A lot of the research we have is about 10-ish years old. So what we want to do is do a lot more in-depth research on exactly where racial bias is at contemporarily, where mental illness on the death row is looking contemporarily, and really digging into that hard data, potentially to convince other stakeholders to take action on the death penalty or potential litigation. Trying to keep our options open, since it looks like going through the ledge is going to be incredibly difficult for the next few cycles here. So for us, we're looking at long-term action to make sure we have the tools and information we needed to get abolition through, potentially if not in 2024, 2026, or 2028. So we're taking a longer view on abolition.
And just for the folks at home, I know many of the folks watching are very passionate about this issue and criminal justice issues like we've been talking about all night. What can advocates do to help keep this issue in the public eye and make sure that we can kind of continue on the momentum that we've been building the past couple of years? Because yes, we now have a setback with, I think, Governor Lombardo potentially not wanting to do anything on this issue. That doesn't mean we shouldn't push him, and that doesn't mean that this issue needs to go by the wayside.
No doubt. I know for us, we're going to be looking at doing, at least 20-ish events this session or this year. For us, we want to amplify voices of victim family members, which is, I think, the pro side has been very vocal in organizing folk, but we've done a good job. We can do a much better job. So we're going to be making sure that we organize these voices this year and going forward. We have a social worker who's with us part-time, who's working with victim family members, both people who had family who went to death row and murder victim family members, to get their stories. And I know she's already has more work than she could deal with, working with these folk, helping to cultivate their stories. I know one thing we're going to start doing is actually reaching out to the men on death row and start having direct communication. Some of our allies in Arizona do the same thing with the men on their death row, and we're going to start cultivating that same relationship. So you'll definitely see that popping up throughout the year. And come the fall, we're going to be doing a week of events with Journey of Hope. They're a national victim advocacy group that argue against not just the death penalty, but argue for restorative justice and those kind of practices. So those are all kind of the events that we're going to be doing. But if you know any organizations that want to take a stand on the death penalty, or want to just know more, feel free to contact us. We regularly do trainings and kind of educational events with people around the issue. Do a lot with the law school and a lot with some Democratic clubs in town, but we're always willing to reach out to anyone who wants more information.
Couldn't get it off of mute. Yes, and we'll put the coalition's website in the chat. So if y'all want to get involved and support the coalition's work, you can do so. Jody and Denise, I want to come back to you. We obviously are going into a legislative session. I'll be moving to Carson City in about a month. So what is on your agenda for the Nevada legislature, knowing what we know about the current state of the governor's office and what we're looking at in terms of the setup and the makeup of the legislature this year. So what's on your agenda?
So, Dee, you want to go first, or you want me to go?
I want you to go first. Oh my gosh, sure don't.
No. So I will say this is only our second session. So the last time we had been in existence for like a few weeks when we got thrown into things. And so we've come a long way in the past couple of years. We worked really hard during the interim session, and we're able, the Judiciary Committee, the Interim Judiciary Committee actually has already supported many of the bills that we wanted to elevate this year. One on visitation. So for people who don't know, like as much as we talk about when we're talking about rehabilitation for people who are incarcerated and the majority coming home, visitation is not a right, it's a privilege. And so during COVID, they took visitation away, and you saw all types of mental health issues and suicides, and the rate of those problems greatly increased. We're seeing those things happen, like indicators that visitation may be taken away again because of critical staffing shortages. And we have a lot of concerns about those. Like, we would like to see a plan put together, and we're hoping new administration will actually sit down with us and work with us on it. But the Judiciary Committee did accept a bill around visitation, language still to come. The other big part of that bill is really that people who have ever had a felony cannot visit their loved one in prison. So if I have a felony and then we have people who have 20-year-old like felony possession of marijuana charges that have never been able to visit their kids in prison. We have people who were like STG or like gang affiliated as teenagers, and now they're 70 years old and they can't go see their child or their kid or their niece or their nephew. So there's a lot of work to do in that area, and prior administration was unwilling to discuss it. And so that has already passed through the Interim Judiciary Committee. So that one's going to be getting assigned. We talked a lot during COVID about like good time credits and STAP credits and things like that we're working backwards, and it got the attention of the Judiciary Committee and specifically Senator Harris, who was like, this does not make sense. Like, you guys can't even explain to us how these credit systems work. So if Annette were to get her high school diploma, they would say, okay, you get, and I might have the numbers wrong now, you get 45 days of credit off of your sentence, and you get, or 45 days and 45 credits, but nobody in the world can figure out what these credits are. They mysteriously become like a fraction of something. And so there will be a sentencing, like a really specific look at sentencing credits and how those are handled, and a potential overhaul. And that is in cooperation with the Judiciary Committee and the Sentencing Commission. We also, one of our big bills this year is on fines and fees. So it is common for people in prison to leave prison with huge medical debt. We always think prison is 3 hots and a cot and free medical care, and it is not true. And so they have signs up everywhere. If you get hurt on the yard, you attempt suicide, you anything, and you have medical bills that are owed to the Department of Corrections, they will come after you through collection. So while people are attempting to rebuild their lives after incarceration, we now not only have this caste system and not only have all of these other, things that impede restarting your life, you also are going to go out with debt. That also includes waiving medical copays, or like not having medical copays. Nevada has some of the highest in the country, and addressing markups and kickbacks that they get through their contracts, which is they're taking approximately 66% over. So whatever the cost supply chain wise is, families are paying an additional 66% that then goes back to NDOC in the state in order to pay for incarceration. And we firmly believe that if we're going to choose as a society to use incarceration, the burden of that should not be falling on families who are already losing an income, losing very different. Am I forgetting one? Oh, we're talking, we have a couple other ones that we still don't have sponsors for. One is a language access bill. Believe it or not, in Nevada Department of Corrections, if you do not speak English, you are stuck. We have examples of people who send medical kites or ask for questions about their prescriptions, and they're sent a kite. If they say it in Spanish, they're sent kites back. Kites are like requests. They're sent back and said, write it in English. And so recently there have been 3 or 4 deaths that happened specifically because of that, because people they took the medication incorrectly or they didn't get care. And so we're working on that. There is a bill, we're not leading on it, but about a dignity for incarcerated women. And now in Mass Lib are leading on that, but we're definitely supporting on it. That would provide hygiene products right now. I forgot the number. Do you remember, Denise? Is it 10 pads a month or 20 pads a month? That's all you get.
Somewhere between there.
And feel like there's one more that I'm forgetting. Language. Oh, we're working with getting a sponsor on a bill that would be humane healthcare. And so it's modeled after a bill in Nevada or in California that really, like, right now, if your loved one goes in the hospital, you don't get to go visit them. If they die in the hospital, you'll be notified after they pass away. And so there's all of these things that just are inhumane for families, for children, for the incarcerated. And so this humane healthcare bill would address some of those issues. In addition to, hopefully, we're looking at some other issues around medical neglect. So we have a big year for us. That's a lot.
Yeah, I'm over here like, well, okay, we got to update the tracker now. Now we know the bills.
Yeah, that is a lot.
You wanna hop in?
Solitary confinement, but we don't have a sponsor this year yet, so it might have to wait.
Y'all have a lot of work to do, but we thank you for all of your hard work on these important issues. I want to go to our audience questions really quickly. We've got a lot of them, so thank you all for contributing to the audience questions tonight. We'll start with this one, and I think this is the one on everybody's mind, Brandon, but Shelby asks, is there any hope to end the death penalty under new Governor Joe Lombardo?
I would say there's potentially something there. What I will say is we haven't had a chance to speak with the governor directly, so we don't know exactly what his position is. So potentially there's some bipartisan work that can happen, but ultimately, we're open to working with anyone who's willing to work with us.
And one of the things that I think, Brandon, and I know we made this point last time, but I really think it's important to note it again. It's not just liberal lefty groups who are part of your coalition. I know Americans for Prosperity and various other kind of right-wing groups are a part of it as well. Can you talk to us about why this is such a nonpartisan issue and why, justice should not be a partisan issue?
Right. I think if we jump back to like the early 90s, it was definitely a partisan issue where there were Democrats who supported it. And for Republicans, it was a hardline party position that we are all pro death penalty. In the past few years, we started to see that shift quite a bit. And in states like Ohio and in Virginia, we've seen conservatives coming out against the death penalty. And I think primarily it's, the culture of tough on crime has started to shift a bit. But primarily there's an overwhelming amount of information about how ineffective the death penalty is at deterring crime or creating safer environments or even serving victims. So what we've seen, especially, is when confronted with this information, it becomes much harder to say, yeah, we should keep the death penalty, because we have data going back before we abolished the death penalty in the 70s, showing it wasn't effective, and the same problems that existed that made the Supreme Court address it back in 1972 still exist in the contemporary death penalty. So I think that's why we've seen a shift, and the issue become more bipartisan.
There's another question, Brandon, for you, and you may not be able to answer this, but we all fought against the Marsy's Law issue when it came forward for various reasons. We'll ask, could there have been a way to put the commutations on the Board of Pardons agenda that would have avoided the Marsy's Law issue that was brought up by the judge in Carson City?
Yeah, so I'll just echo Jody and say I am not a lawyer. I very specifically did not go to law school. But at least from the people I know who did punish themselves like that, it was an incredibly broad ruling on Marsy's Law. And I guess like this part of the issue with, like, on paper, Marsy's Law makes sense. I think before it was passed in the Constitution, there was already a state statute that basically did 90% of what Marsy's Law did. So whether or not we need it, I think, is a question for legal scholars. But the way that he ruled, I don't think there was a way he could have. It was ruled so incredibly broad.
Yeah, and I think that the ruling will have future repercussions for the Board of Pardons potentially because of the way he ruled on it. So I think that's going to be another issue that we're going to have to deal with down the road.
Yeah, no doubt. Usually Nevada judges are real conservative on setting new precedent, but apparently not him.
Well, that's what happens when you go to a Trumper type judge. Sorry, just saying it out loud because I know we're all thinking it. So I think this is an important question. I want to come to Aaron's question, and Jody or Denise, if y'all want to jump in on this one. How can we help amplify the voices of people with these lived experiences, and how can I'm adding this, how can we all be better advocates for them as well?
You want me to go, D?
Yeah, sure.
She's like, we go through this all the time that I'm always like, do you want to say it? And she'll be like, no. So I think there's a couple of ways. Like, one of the things that we are going to be implementing this year is really learning circles, peer learning circles, where we want to bring people from a wide variety. So like, if you're a community ally that just cares about this issue, like learning and understanding from people who are and have been directly impacted by the system. So we have a new team that will be rolling out in January at the end of January, beginning of February, that's called the Uproar. And the Uproar is really a group of people who have been impacted. We have kids who have a parent who's incarcerated. We have families. We have a majority of people who have spent a significant amount of time in prison. And I think learning from other people helps to make sure that we're centering their voices in that process. I think the other thing is like, just digging in. Like with us, we always start people with letter readers. We have hundreds. I have 750 letters right now in an intake folder. We're doing a training this weekend because we have 4,000 people that we communicate with now. That number of letters that's coming in is always growing. And so it sensitizes you to like really what they're saying the issues are, what their lived experiences, and then finding opportunities. Our big mantra going into the next couple of years is really like prison doesn't have to be like this. This is not like Nevada is not doing this as a best case scenario. And I think learning like ways to be able to stand in line at the grocery store and start a conversation with the person that's next to you. I talk to everyone, like you would think that I spent 50 years in prison, but it's like and Denise will tell you, I can whip out a story of like what happened to somebody or why it happened. And no matter who it is, whether it's the most conservative or most progressive person, it doesn't matter. I truly believe that by making sure that every person is touched, like Denise and I would not be living the life that we're living did we not have a loved one that ended up being incarcerated. And our goal is to always make sure that people are touched by those stories. Like at the end of the day, we're storytellers, to make sure that everybody feels the impact of that. And I think that's how the average person can really, like, I mean, if you want to volunteer, go to our website. We've got a zillion opportunities, but in your day-to-day life, I think making sure you're sensitized to it and that you create that opportunity.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions because they're related. So Woodtunes asks, I think restorative justice, RJ, isn't in Nevada because some think it's too compassionate or it somehow takes away from the justice from the victims. I disagree. What do you think about the opinions of those not supporting restorative justice? And then I'm going to add on, Aaron also asks, how can folks get involved in supporting restorative justice programs that might be coming along in Nevada? Oh, Jody, you're on mute, so come back in.
For us, I think it's exactly what I just said, is like, come to peer learning circles, come to those spaces where we're talking about it, get involved in, like, our pardons advocacy project is, we're developing, like, how do we create this restorative justice space? And right now, so I don't know, I can't remember the name of who asked it, but Denise is going to probably laugh when I say this. Like, I don't really care what people's opinions are who don't agree with us. Like, ultimately, in my soul, I know restorative justice is the way that we start to fix this system. And so our goal over the next however long is to touch as many people as we can with that message. And there are going to be people who agree, people who disagree, people who were planting seeds and 5 years later they agree. But, you know, I used to very recklessly say, like, you know what, I hope something bad happens to your family then. And then you have to have somebody in prison in order to do it. But I don't say that anymore. Now I really am like, the uproar, which is going to be teams of, if you're an expert, if you're a person who cares about it, like, these are the spaces where we can get into our communities and really dig in and touch people with stories that contradict what their belief system may be at the time.
And Jody, why do you think we don't have as much restorative justice here in Nevada? Like, how do we get over that hurdle? How do we change hearts and minds to start to move us in that direction in this state?
I don't know why, like, I don't know why it's not there. I think it's not even just Nevada. I think it's more prevalent in some areas, but I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about why it's not here as much as how do we bring it here, right? I try not to look at the barriers, but more at, like, the opportunities of how we create something new. And I forgot the second part of your question, Annette.
What do we got to do to bring it here? And what change do we need to make to start to move that in the right direction?
I think that just like with everything else, we have to find like-minded people who believe in it and find different things are going to meet with, like, impact different people. I was talking to Rita the other day. Rita is somebody who loves, like, performance arts and things like that. Okay, I have people who will never go to a performance art, but they'll sit down and talk to people or mentor or do, I think as an abolitionist, I'm always looking at, like, how do we deconstruct the systems that are in place while replacing them with community? And I think that's another part of it. And Denise touched on it earlier, is like, we're not only doing all of this deconstructing work, but we also are building community. We have, specifically, it's called the Stoop, and it is a community, a mutual aid. We make sure people are We babysit for each other, we drive each other places, and we make sure that when people come home from prison, we're trying to give them the best case scenario to not end up back in prison. And like, I think that growing that type of a community then grows, you said it, I think it's in our mission statement too, is like, we want to connect and build a community with other like-minded people. And as we continue to grow that, like, eventually we outnumber the people who oppose us.
Thank you for that. All right, Brandon, I'm going to end with you. And I think this is an important one to end with. Ignacio asks, isn't the death penalty unconstitutional under the 8th Amendment? The amendment says excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So where are we at in terms of the federal side of things, and why is this still used?
So in terms of like 8th Amendment, fighting around the 8th Amendment, I'm again not a lawyer, TM, but the problem ultimately is the Supreme Court has effectively said, we think there are humane ways that you can kill people. And the states have basically said, cool, bet. Let me find the humane ways to kill people. So ultimately, the problem that we've always run into when we try and take 8th Amendment challenges to the Supreme Court is you need to bring overwhelming amounts of evidence that this form of execution is cruel and unusual. Because at the end of the day, and I'm spacing on the Supreme Court case name, it's the case in 1976 that brought back the death penalty, or allowed states to bring it back. They basically argued that killing someone for a crime is not, in and of itself, cruel and unusual punishment. There are ways you can kill people that is cruel and unusual punishment, which sounds like not a big difference, but effectively states can find ways to do it that are humane. And I think, that's where we find ourselves. We just have a court that has become more conservative, and we've seen them when it comes to allowing, for a lot of state death penalty cases, if you are innocent and you have evidence of your innocence, your state court will just tell you to kick rocks and basically ignore your evidence. So your only recourse is to go into the federal system. We've seen in a couple cases recently where they've basically said, cool, we think maintaining the rule of law is more important than your innocence. So they were limiting the kind of challenges that you could bring into the federal system. So I don't think, unless we start seeing massive changes to the court, that they are going to be willing to hear 8th Amendment challenges, because right now they're already rolling back some of the protections the federal government provides at the state level.
Well, thank you for taking us out on a depressing note about the Supreme Court of the United States, Brandon. I appreciate it.
Sorry,
no, don't say sorry. It's not your fault. You didn't put them there. So I want to say thank you to Brandon and Denise and Jody for all of their good work and all of their hard work when it comes to criminal justice reform and reform on so many of these important issues. If y'all have questions, or if you want to get more involved with Return Strong or with the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty, we're going to put their links in the chat one more time. Please get involved with them. They need volunteers. They need resources. So please make your voices heard. Get involved with this important work. We're going to need your voices during session on these issues, because these issues are not going away just because Governor Lombardo was elected. And so we are still going to be doing this work all through session, as Jody and Brandon and Denise talked about. We will be right there by their side, fighting with them. So I want to say thank you all for joining us tonight on another episode of Out in Front, rebranded Out in Front. Again, a big shout out to our team for that rebranding. Reminder, sign up to get your Progressive Summit tickets. That's happening January 21st and 22nd. It's all virtual again this year, so we can have a statewide summit and make sure that everyone across the state can participate. So get your ticket now, or get your scholarship now. We will put that link in the chats as well. And if you want to get more involved as we go up to the legislative session, like I said, I'm moving up there in about a month. Session starts February 6th. There's no time to waste on so many of the issues we care about. So we're going to need all of your help and support. So get involved with us now. Thanks again for joining us tonight on Out in Front. We will be back out in front next week, live at 5 on Thursday evening. Can't wait to have you. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe in the weather and have a great evening.